Well, hello, everybody. This is Douglas Allen Frazier with the Douglas Allen Frazier Show for the 23rd of March, 2016. We're going to conclude our sharing on the idea of Islam, facts, or dreams. What have we constructed? What has our government constructed? What has our news media constructed? Not facts, but of their own creation of what Islam is all about. We've highlighted some areas kind of to highlight what we talked about on the last session. We had the words of Robert Jackson, a former Supreme Court justice, who made a study of Islam and made some comments. I'll quickly go over his comments again. In any broad sense, Islamic law offers the American lawyer a study in dramatic contrasts. Even casual acquaintance and superficial knowledge, all that most of us at the bench or bar will be able to acquire, reveal that its striking features relative to our law are not likenesses, but inconsistencies. In its source, its scope, and its sanctions, the law of the Middle East is the antithesis of Western law. There's a very encapsulated look at what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a total opposite direction of the way things are in the United States and the way people from the Middle East, except for Israel, want to accept. They make a move, they bring in people on a refugee status, and they do not want to assimilate into the West and be under Western laws because it's totally inconsistent with the way they have lived in the past and the way they see themselves living in the future, because they are taught by the imams, the Islamic theologians, that their goal is to make Islam the world's lawgiver. That's their quest. That's their goal. Now, just look at what happened just yesterday in Brussels. Once again, Europe has been struck with a horrific count of life. And I would say the blame goes to the misunderstanding of the European Union, the various countries, of allowing this mass immigration and not curtailing those that were already there and searching out. Look at this. It seems like we have a stubbornly unwilling group of people to deal with the reality of Islam. Our leaders in the U.S. have constructed an Islam of their very own. The triumph of willful blindness and political correctness over common sense was best illustrated by the former British Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, when she described terrorism. And this is much like what we hear in the United States. This was described by the British Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, when she described terrorism as anti-Islamic activity. In other words, the savagery that we have just seen revealed again in Brussels is not merely unrelated to Islam. It becomes by dint of its being inconsistent with a religion of peace. It is contrary to Islam. This explains our own government's hand-wringing over the idea of radicalization. We're supposed to wonder why young Muslims spontaneously become violent radicals, as if there is no belief system that is involved that would even draw them into it. Look how long it took our government to call the massacre that took place at Fort Hood by a Muslim U.S. Army doctor who went in and cried Allah Akbar, began shooting people, killing 13 or 14 people, wounding quite a few others. And what does the President of the United States call it? It's workplace violence. Workplace violence. It's not consistent with the idea that most politicians, most government heads, and the head of it all, the President of the United States. So we have this political correctness that seems to be on steroids. And it's a dangerous policy that we have seen played out around the world. Consider the inability of our government officials to call a mass murder an attack by Muslims, a terrorist attack, unless and until the police uncover evidence proving that the mass murders had some tie to a designated terrorist group such as ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Just look how long it took, several days even, for the recent attacks in San Bernardino, California.
Battery is under a quarter full.
So, what are we to do? What are we to do? We have terrorist recruits already sharing the same ideology as the groups that want to impose Sharia, not only in the United States, but around the world. All they need in order to execute a terrorist attack is some paramilitary training, which is readily available in more places than just Syria. I would point out that our own government, either the FBI or Homeland Security, has designated certain places, even in the United States, I live in Texas, that they are following as being probable training camps for terrorists. But there is also this dangerous flip side to our government's insistence on making up its own version of Islam, is that anyone who is publicly associated with Islam must be deemed peaceful. This is how we fall into the trap of allowing the Muslim Brotherhood, the world's most influential Islamic supremacist organization, to infiltrate policy-making organs of the U.S. government, not to mention that of our schools, our prisons, and other public institutions. I would point out, about 2 years ago, I was in Dubai. Dubai is, by all accounts, a Muslim nation. It's totally different than what you would expect. It has, I call it Disneyland on steroids in some effect, because of the incredible architecture and things that they readily have available for enjoyment, for pleasure. And people from many countries from around the world go there for a vacation. But I was reading the newspaper one day, and it simply said this: if you belong to the Muslim Brotherhood, we will put you in jail. You see, they recognized that the Muslim Brotherhood was a terrorist organization because they had recognized that wherever the Muslim Brotherhood went, they began to build up and teach a terroristic style of government. And they began to move against the local government if it was not a Muslim or Islamic government. Let's put it this way. They basically saw them as a threat to their nation. So you see, even within an Islamic nation whose head of government is a very wealthy sheikh, but even there, they recognized that these organizations were a threat to their way of life. To quote Churchill again, and this is in closing, facts are better than dreams. In the real world, we must deal with the facts of Islamic supremacism because its jihadist legions have every intention of dealing with us. But we can only defeat them if we resolve to see them for what they are. We can only defeat them if we see them for what they are. You see, this is something that most of our government, especially President Obama, have refused to do. In some of the early days, for many years actually, of the Obama administration, the word terrorist was not even to be used when it dealt with activities by Islamic terrorists. They did not want to face the facts of who we were dealing with. So I would just say this, as the people who are listening to this, most of you that are probably listening to this understand that we are in a war. We are in a war of civilizations, and a war that must be won. A war that must be faced. It must be faced and fought with wisdom, discernment, and understanding. But first of all, we must recognize what we are dealing with and who and why those that are coming against us are doing what they're doing. And we must make some changes, some radical changes, to fight those who would fight against us. Let us use the wisdom that God has given us to discern between those that are truly peaceful, moderate Muslims who desire peace in their own homes, in their own nations, and those who would go forth and try to kill or destroy those of us who live in our nation, under our laws, under our culture, in our societies. It is not against our American character. It is who we are as Americans, that we will fight for the freedom of our nation. We will fight and protect our rights as a nation. Anything less than that, and we become who we are not. So let's be consistent with our foundations, with our laws, so that we might become the leader once again in the free world. Thank you for listening. This is the final segment of looking at Islam, Fact or Dreams. We'll see you again. This is Douglas Allen Frazier, closing out this episode of the Douglas Allen Frazier Show.